Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Edge of Tomorrow. Episode 15. Chapter 113a. Chaos opened the door to the van, and when he was halfway through, I launched myself at him. Either Chaos underestimated me more than the assassin, or he truly loved any excuse for a fight, because he tumbled to the ground like he weighed less than the hound. I rolled on top of him, jamming the nail as deep into his shoulder as I could whilst clambering forward. His hand wrapped around my ankle, making me stumble when I should have already been running. Instinctively, I lashed out with the same foot he had grabbed and smashed my heel into his teeth. His grip loosened enough for me to slip free, stumbling to my feet and running forwards. Before I barreled into the thick brush of the forest, my breaths labored and pained from the tiny dagger in my hip. I glanced back to see Chaos's beautiful, smiling face, both teeth and eyes crimson. I counted the seconds in my head, lost track, and began counting again. Pain was a distant memory, burning the corners of my awareness just enough to leave a dull ache. I couldn't feel the pain in my hip anymore, just this tearing sensation whenever I moved strenuously, which was a lot at the moment. I had torn the knife out, almost doubling over when the silver-coated handle burned my hand. Somehow, it made sense that Chaos would have a knife that harmed its user, to feel pain whilst inflicting it. I spun on my heel, my eyes practically rolling as I heard Chaos's joyful whooping fill the forest. It bounced from tree to tree, echoing in every direction yet coming from seemingly nowhere. I continued turning, losing track of where I had been and where I was going. For the second time in what I would soon name the worst day of my life, I was tackled to the ground. This time my face was pushed into the dirt, and I clenched my eyes shut to avoid getting anything in my eyes. I was lifted from the ground, met with the smell of body odor and flowers. Tisk tisk, bad soul eater. Chaos's voice was right by my ear, laughing loudly when I jerked my head away. I wrenched open my eyes, wincing when they stung and itched from the dirt that was spread across my face. The hound held me again, the ever-so-silent grunt man who did as he was told. Chaos was walking behind us, his hands in his pockets as he flashed me his pretty grin. "You ran for 6 minutes, by the way," he commented helpfully, and it was in this moment that I knew Chaos was the second biggest monster I had ever met. His smile revealed nothing of the beast that hid within him. The other girls I play chase with usually only last for 2. "No games," the hound said flatly, his voice unusually deep. He turned to face Chaos. The abrupt motion made my head swim. "You cannot KL this one." I realized it was just us 3, and that the assassin was clearly back at the vehicle. Even though it made my body ache to try and use my abilities, I reached out tentatively. A feather-light caress against the hound's life force, feeling its intoxicating warmth just inches away. "Would never dream of it, dear hound." Chaos shook his head, a hand against his heart in a very convincing display of offense. The look was wiped away as easy as it had come, replaced with a carefree smile. "Besides, it's assassin you should worry about. She's the one gearing to KL her. I on the other hand think assassin looks lovely with her singular eye, just ravishing." I held back nausea as I was swung around again so that the hound could face Chaos, letting loose a snarl that cracked and echoed through the trees. If he kept spinning me around, I wouldn't be able to draw anything from him. Thankfully, Chaos managed to shut up long enough for me to get my bearings again. I couldn't take much, or too fast. I was sure that he'd notice the significant drain, or the assassin would. The last thing I wanted were her hands on my skin again. The thought sent a chill skittering over me. My first instinct was to drain Chaos dry just for some of the things he's said since capturing me, but he was also one of the most dangerous. I had no clue if his abilities worked on me, but I wouldn't put it past him to hold off until the last moment. Instead, I bided my time and slowly pulled from the hound, stopping whenever he stiffened or twitched. We were back within a minute, telling me I hadn't ran far at all. Beneath the slightly torn fabric of my shirt, I could feel the little knife wound knitting itself back together, taking away the stinging pain of silver in my blood. I wasn't ready to take down the three of them, but this was a start. My limbs no longer felt like lead and the pain in my chest dulled to a slow throb. I stopped pulling from the hound the moment I was within sniffing distance of the assassin. I feigned fatigue, groaning when I was tossed back into the vehicle. Chaos grinned from the seat beside me, the nail still protruding from his shoulder. The quiet hum of the vehicle sounded as we coasted down the highway, away from the fading scent of burning houses and trees. Even as I watched black smoke curl into the sky, and felt Chaos's crimson eyes on my face, I refused to let fear take hold. Well, looks like the twin Cease are back. Chaos cheered, gleefully turning to look out the back window. They sure heal fast. I did the same, only with an abject look on my face. It churned in my gut and rose up in my mouth like acid, searing my tongue and throat so that no sound could slip past. From up front the hound grunted, narrowing his eyes through the rear-view mirror where two onyx-colored wolves could clearly be seen weaving throughout the trees. My heart stammered as I caught sight of them, racing for the vehicle that carried me away. Any flicker of hope I had, it shriveled into a husk when Assassin spoke. I take back what I said, an eye for an eye doesn't sound nearly fair enough. The assassin said smoothly, sparing me a single glance before turning to Chaos. Can you KL them from here? Of course. Chaos scoffed, this time actually offended. He rolled his shoulders and gave me a lopsided grin, off the mountain, or speared on a tree. Tree. Both hound and assassin replied in unison. The hound hit on the brakes, a gentle tap that had the twins gaining on us. Chaos bounced eagerly in his seat, rubbing his hands together like a demented child. They were close now, and I could feel my heart fracturing as I read the emotion in both of their eyes. They could see me through the window, face pale and covered in both blood and dirt. Just as Chaos unleashed his power, I let loose my own. I hadn't much, perhaps even less than Chaos, but there was something I had that he didn't. I had my mates, both of which I refused to let die. Giving myself up to these three, I did it to spare the twins, not to have them KL'd anyway. I had just a split second to ponder if using energy, I didn't have would KL me, but the consequences would be worse if I didn't. No. My scream mirrored Chaos's laugh, though only one of our magic was able to take hold. Both of the twins' eyes widened, still dark and familiar as I flung them back into the depths of the forest. I could feel them, and every branch or tree they clipped as I forced them even further back. During those long moments in between heartbeats, I thought about Mara and Isaiah, pledging to one another that they would not die alone. I felt guilty that I couldn't Alec and Cade that same promise, that we would leave this life together. It wasn't selflessness that made me desperate, hair-pulling desperate to keep them alive. Love, such a small word to encompass something that held no beginning or end. Endless variations, and each one was just as important as the next. Mara's love for Isaiah meant they would face DTH together. My love for Alec and Cade meant keeping them from pain at all costs. It meant sacrificing myself, because I could not live in a world where they didn't exist, and I am much more dangerous than the two of them. It felt like being hit by a pickup truck, using more energy than what I had. It threw me against the driver's seat and onto the floor, where I gasped and sputtered under the weight that seemed to press down on me. Chaos hissed, turning to assassin. He jutted his lower lip out in a pout, an expression that would have worked on almost anyone. I want to go back for them. Boss said to kill them if we had the chance, not to hunt for them. She snarled, looking at the hound. Step on it, we're expected. I was defenseless as Chaos grabbed both of my arms and hauled me onto the seat, giving me a grimace when he lifted a bag of crushed Doritos. You crushed my snacks, Soul Eater, was all he said before opening the bag. That was a cute little escape attempt, Claire. Assassin nodded to herself, not bothering to look back from where she sat in the passenger seat. Her voice was delicate and smooth, every word precise and perfectly pronounced. Congratulations, you spared your mates another week or so. Really, you should have let Chaos have at them. The boss will only make you kill them yourself. Marcus won't get a single thing from me. I promised her, holding on to that truth, searing it into my heart so that even when things get worse, which they will, I knew I wouldn't give in. You say that now, but you got no idea how persuasive he can be. Assassin turned in her seat, grinning darkly when I paled at the sight of her eye. She was right, there was no chance it would heal properly, even with her white wolf abilities. Where her chocolate eye had once been was now a raw festering mass of flesh, trying its best to heal from the wound I inflicted. She gave me a few long seconds to stare, but I refused to squirm at the sight of it. I hissed and recoiled when her cold fingers wrapped around my arm, sending rippling waves of agony up my shoulder. Good night, Soul Eater. The fun really begins when you wake up. I couldn't tell what images and sounds were real, and what horrible things my head had concocted. Screaming, thrashing, and snarling as people were stuck in mid-shift. Magic everywhere so thick that you could choke on it, like sweet syrup turned into gas. Was it their screams or mine that accompanied the pain and fear, the agony and hatred, the hopelessness, such hopelessness that I wanted to curl up in this darkness and let it sweep me away? But I couldn't, not with the faces of two beautiful men burned into my mind, etched so deep that no scalpel could ever mar its surface. Still, the pain continued. Slashes of rage, slices of fear, and bruises full of torment and captivity until it all melted into something painful and heavy, seated right on my chest. My eyes snapped open, bringing light and the faint echo of pain. I clutched the silken blankets that had been thrown over me, a deep shade of navy even under the yellow light of the lamps on either side of the bed. Everything rushed back to me at once, ending with the panic-stricken faces of Alec and Cade's wolves as I threw them back into the forest. I stumbled out of the bed I was in, my legs wobbling beneath me. I groaned when my head swam, still aching and weak from the assassin's touch. Disgust and revulsion ran through me when I glanced down, noticing the sweatpants and tank top I had been dressed in. I was in a fancy-looking bedroom, with a large bed covered in accent pillows, a sectional and a bathroom bigger than one person should ever need. I whipped around when I heard the distinct sound of a lock being unlatched, followed by 3 more. I knew what this was then, a padded cell, an offer. The singular door, made of what had to be silver, held a small window about eye height. It was covered with a thin sheet of metal, giving me no forewarning to whoever was about to come inside. Even with how weak and disoriented I felt, my magic lashed out with everything it had the moment Marcus Novak's face came into view. His neatly trimmed hair that sat thick on his head, just a slight spattering of facial hair, enough to make him look his age. A man without life in his eyes, without emotion or humanity. Just a pristine, neat version of chaos. "Hello, Claire," Marcus said politely, stepping inside with assassin on his heels. The assassin's cold magic sliced into my own, searing my skin and making my already weak body feel that much worse. My legs finally gave out, and I crumpled to the pale carpet that sat on the floor. I made note of the hulking guard outside, along with the hound's ripe scent. I also happened to make note that the assassin now wore an eye patch. If I remembered the jagged on her face correctly, the healed version probably wasn't too many steps up. I glared up at her, hoping she knew I didn't regret a thing. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to speak with you before you consequently pass out again. Marcus said in a rehearsed polite tone, one I knew could change at the flip of a switch. I reined in that anger, that absolute disgust I felt for this one man and managed not to hurl as I looked him in his eyes, already plotting how I would kill him in his own land. Chapter 114. Really, there's no reason to be this difficult. Marcus sighed, genuine disappointment in his flat, blue eyes. You've lost, Claire. This scheme of yours to invent a new world has failed, you have failed. What's best for you and your mates, is to pick up the shattered pieces of your failure and turn them into something better. And you're what's better. I croaked, rage and malice searing the edges of my words. My head throbbed from the assassin's magic, forcing dark spots to creep at the edges of my vision. All of that power has given you a big head, Marcus. We haven't lost anything. I'm one person, there are countless more out there who will see you removed. With your surrender, that spark you started will die out. He replied evenly, softly even though there was nothing tender about his words. He stood over me, staring down at me with just a hint of joy in his eyes, like I was just the toy he had been searching for. I think I'll leave you, for now. I have many plans for you and I, Claire. After you announce your surrender and service to my cause, we can finally begin. I didn't move from my place on the floor until Marcus and the assassin left, the metal door clanging shut behind them. I could hear the two guards outside mumbling to one another before falling silent. I knew I was being watched, both from common sense and the small camera in the corner of the room. The one that I refused to look at. I needed privacy, and desperately hoped that Marcus wasn't big enough a creep to place one in the bathroom. I didn't need to feign weakness as I used the bed to force myself into a standing position. My legs were weak, but I managed to stumble into the bathroom, grimacing at the strong scent of cleaner as it hung in the air. The bathroom was small, with just a sink, toilet, and a stall shower. I couldn't have cared less what amenities my current room held, just that it was camera-free. I scoured every inch of the bathroom and found nothing. With a sigh of relief, I turned on the shower, using the noise as cover in case there happened to be any microphones. I glanced down at the charm bracelet around my wrist, the golden-plated piece of jewelry that might just be my salvation. A last gift from Mara, just like the knife Isaiah had given me, though it was taken when I was captured. Mara's gift, it was meant to fool the eye. A gift, should you ever become separated from your mates. She said kindly, taking one of my hands in her own. I could feel the cold jewelry graze against my skin, along with the golden heart that hung from a small chain. Isaiah and I made a promise long ago, that we would both leave this world together. It is my hope that you and your mates will have the same future, one where you never have to live without each other. This bracelet will help you achieve that. Is it magic? I asked. A different sort of magic. She smirked, holding the small heart between her two fingers. It's a type of human magic, called a GPS tracker. You press the heart when you want to send your location. The stone will light up for 3 seconds, then go out. Your mates will have direct access, along with Isaiah and myself. Oh! I flushed, wondering why I hadn't thought of that before. You weren't the only one raised by humans. She chuckled, glancing back to where Isaiah waited only somewhat impatiently. Should we all survive this, I'd like to tell you about them. I held the little heart in between my fingers, feeling my own heartbeat patter in my chest. A second passed, and then two, the shower's waterfall running in the background. I pushed, feeling a small click beneath my fingers, followed by the little scarlet gemstone lighting up. It sent relief flooding through me, strong enough to send me sliding down the wall, struggling to catch my breath. Once I mustered up the strength, I pulled the clothes off my body and stood under the hot spray of the shower long enough to wipe some of the ache from my muscles. Afterwards, I tumbled head first into the bed, my eyes already closed before I had the chance to crawl under the blanket. I woke to the sound of the metal door being opened, the numerous locks clicking out of place. My eyes flew open, and I was already in a sitting position when the door swung shut. My eyes went to Marcus first, then the assassin as she stood at his side. The eye patch she wore was red today, bright like her auburn hair. I could see her visibly tense, fists clenched and jaw taut as she glared at me. I could practically taste her need to harm me, even without feeling all of those violent emotions run through her. I realized with surprise that I could feel her emotions. Even with this improvement, I didn't dare try to pull from either one. For a brief second, I tried to reach out to Alec or Cade to feel their thoughts or presences, but I came up with nothing. A spot on my arm throbbed painfully, making me very aware of a burning beneath my skin. Marcus seemed pleased by this, his eyes flitting between the assassin and I. "Very good, Claire. Making smart decisions already." He murmured his praise, lips upturned in a professional smile. He waved a hand towards the assassin, who took two very reluctant steps back. Marcus's voice held all of the emotion and sincerity his soul did not. "Ariana will not use her abilities on you, should you behave yourself. The silver injection is a precaution I'm afraid I cannot do without. Even so, it is not my wish for you be a caged pet. There are opportunities here for you, you just need the courage to discover them. In fact, let me show you the bounds of my generosity. Come, follow me." "Alpha." Ariana the assassin questioned. For just a fraction of a second, I saw rage glittering in Marcus's cool eyes. "You have your orders, Ariana." His voice was sharp, daring her to speak out. Instead, she directed that rage onto me. Snatching my arm in her hand, she pulled me from the padded cell I was in, and out into the hallway. While she wasn't using her magic on me, the stiletto nails she had on dug into my skin. I took the time to look around, scanning my surroundings as I tried to memorize every detail. Wherever we were, it looked more like a mansion than a corporate building or some kind of hideout. There were CS embroidered with golden thread, tables with vases of flowers throughout the hallways, and fancy paintings of middle-aged men with gruff-looking faces. We turned down two halls, making a left and then a right. A guard dressed in dark clothing opened the second door on the right and stepped aside. It was clearly an office, the most organized one I had ever seen. Bookcases lined one wall, full of different texts. A large desk sat to the left, free of any papers or personal belongings. A large filing cabinet sat along another wall, with each drawer labeled and tagged. Finally, at the center of the room was a circular table, the only occupied chair belonged to Zayn Novak. Surprise threatened to blossom in my eyes, but I stifled the emotion when I felt the Ariana watching. Smoothing my features into general disdain for everyone in the room, I let out a harsh breath when she finally retracted her nails from my forearm. Zayn Novak sat at the head of the table, wearing a slate grey suit and a blue tie that matched his eyes perfectly. A laptop sat in front of him, open with its screen brightly lit. His chocolate hair was trimmed and neat, highlighting his full brows and sharp jawline. He looked better than ever, the crack in shield still very much there. Even though there was nothing familiar in his eyes, it relieved me that Tori had an effect on the man. "Sit down," Marcus commanded, forcing me to grit my teeth together to keep from saying something stupid. My eyes unwittingly flickered to Zayn, who watched with perfect disinterest. Marcus's eyes held disdain as he looked at his son, turning that same expression towards me. "Do not look to my son for rescue, Claire. You will find nothing but disappointment, just as I have for 21 years. Zayn made no move, no reaction that would show he had even heard his father's words. "Now, let's get on with it. I do hate delaying things." Marcus smiled thinly, gesturing to the laptop his son now used. Zayn hit a few buttons before spinning the device around to face me. This time I couldn't stifle my gasp, nor my surprise as both Alec and Cade's wolves popped onto the screen. The video was only a few seconds long, but full of snarling and screaming. Cade's wolf exploded from the forest in a rush of broken branches and snapping teeth, barreling into the first wolf he found. Alec followed after, sinking his teeth into the first who dare fight against him. The video faded out after one of the wolves was tossed in its direction, turning into nothing more than endless static. "This is but one of many attacks orchestrated by your mates, over the course of these 4 days." Marcus began, giving me no time to process the fact that 4 days had already passed. The rest of what he had to say was spoken with suppressed irritation. It made me somewhat smug to know that Alec and Cade were making life difficult for Marcus. They are rather resourceful, and clearly have allied themselves with both Alpha Isaiah and Luna Mara. Not to matter, their plans are unimportant. It's what I have to offer you. Think of it as incentive to behave. Rather than your twins, I will allow you to keep them. Anger flooded through me, red hot as it surged beneath my skin. I felt the overwhelming temptation to use my magic wash over me, only suppressed because Ariana sat in the room. She narrowed her eyes at my rage, but did not use her magic to incapacitate me. "You'll allow me to keep my mates?" I repeated, my hands trembling as I laced my every word with venom and poison. "You will never have my support, Marcus. It does not matter who you take, or who you kill so long as I am alive, I will fight against you. For now, Claire. You will fight, for now." His reply was smooth and confident. His hands splayed out on the table as he smirked down at me. "Believe me, I will catch them. Just like I caught you, and the countless others before." Before I could answer, a dull vibration ran through the room. Marcus pulled a phone from his pocket, glancing down at the text for just 2 seconds. A full smile broke out on his face. Given his movie star looks, the sight should have been dazzling, but his eyes were lifeless pools shoved into the hollows of his face. "Well, what a coincidence. They've just attacked again," he mused, glancing at me briefly before turning to Zayn. "Take Ariana and escort Claire back to her room. Do try not to ruin things from the short walk between here and there. He won't keep them alive for long. Especially since you refuse to cooperate. I'm going to ask if he'll let me have the big one." Ariana purred, a sultry grin forming on her face. "When we win this war, and Marcus D., I won't have to ask if I can have you." I snarled, wishing desperately that I could hurl my rage and frustration at her. Chapter 115. As soon as the words left my lips, she dug her fingers into my arm, the icy claws of her magic latching onto me instantly. Cold flooded my senses, burning and aching as it sapped what little strength I had. "Ariana, do I need to inform you that you are violating a direct order?" Zayn drawled in a bored, yet professional tone. His piercing blue eyes bore holes into her face, but conveyed not an ounce of concern for my well-being. Part of me was terrified that this wasn't just good acting, that the indifference in his eyes was placed there, built from years of practice. After a few long seconds, Ariana released me. I had just a few seconds to wonder if her abilities affected all white wolves the same way, before my legs gave out and I fell to the floor. My head was swimming, a steady drum beat as it throbbed miserably. "Don't play boss, Zayn. It certainly doesn't suit you." Ariana snickered, sending me a dark look that made me bite back a wicked snarl. Her voice was cruel and self-satisfied. "Besides, I'm a higher rank than you. The Alpha's son." I fought to keep conscious, taking deep breaths whilst listening to the two of them argue. Slowly, the spots faded from my eyes, and I was able to pay more attention to the two of them. It was becoming more and more clear that the only people Ariana seemed to tolerate were the Hound, and Marcus. Well, I'd say she more than tolerated Marcus, considering how she followed him around, the assassin to a king. Even without the feel of her emotions across my skin, I could see the loathing and jealousy written across her face as she glared at Zayn. "Yes, Ariana. You are his favorite pet." Zayn stepped forwards, towering over her. She didn't balk, but I could see the hot coals of rage in her eyes ignite, even if she couldn't act on those murderous impulses. Zayn's voice was smooth and emotionless, "But there is one thing we both know, you do not defy a direct order. It doesn't matter who you are, your screams will sound the same when you're punished. You wouldn't dare." She hissed, and I swore I could hear her jaw clicking as she clenched it tightly. "He's already furious about your little accident. What do you think he'd do if he found out?" Not so tough when you can't use your magic on a normal wolf." Zayn's voice grew low, and he moved his head to the side as he stared her down. "Oh, don't look so sullen. Now we've both got something on each other." I wasn't sure, but I swore I saw just a flicker of relief in her eyes. I couldn't help but look at Zayn, and wonder if this was how he had to act all of the time. Blackmailing each other, constantly at one another's throats just to survive, to climb up the food chain, knowing that you'll never be safe, not entirely. Not when Marcus Novak sits above you, each day deciding whether or not you deserve to live. Disappointment and mistakes could sway that choice, two things both humans and werewolves were prone to. Imperfections, Marcus couldn't handle imperfections. I now understood that hardened wall around Zayn's emotions, constructed to keep him from feeling too deeply. I couldn't fathom having that kind of restraint, to hold back each tidal wave before it blasted the shore and soaked the sand. I wondered how many times those waves barreled him down as a child, how many times he had nearly D** in his emotions before he finally realized, he was so much better off without them. "Let's escort her back to her cell, and be done with the unpleasantness," Zayn said smoothly, even though there was definitely a "for now" in that statement. Ariana went silent for a few seconds, her eyes glazing over before she snapped back into reality. The conversation between her and Marcus must have been a total of 3 seconds long, but it was enough to have her glowering down at me. "Alpha wants me to join the fight. Her little twins are starting fires now. How charming." She flashed me a grin that was all teeth, like a shark stalking a small fish. I felt a chill work its way down my spine as she continued, "I'll have to drain you again, just to the point of unconsciousness. Just to keep you weak. Not to worry though, I'll make it extra painful for you." I was still on the floor staring up at her flaming eyes and silky hair. Even though I already felt, frustration managed to keep me strong. She was going to hurt me anyway, and enjoy every second. What I wasn't going to do, was roll over and take it like a dog. I wouldn't submit the way she had to Marcus. Maybe you should have waited to drain me once I was back in my cell. I answered stiffly. My stare was latched onto hers, so much so that I could see the amber hues in her eyes. As I knew she would, because Ariana was becoming just a tad predictable, she dug her fingernails into my arm and hauled me up. Pain coursed through my arm like tiny daggers, but it was nothing compared to the feel of her actively draining me. Thankfully she wasn't at the moment, but each step towards my cell acted as the countdown clock. I'll drag you, and it won't be by your arm. She warned, and I knew she was telling the truth. I stumbled on my 2 feet, tripping and using the wall to keep myself upright as she stormed down the hall and back to my padded cell. Zayn followed behind, still leaving me confused as to whether or not he gave ACP about anything. "Good night, Claire." Ariana grinned, and the smile would have been sweet if it weren't for the cruelty in her eyes. I was shoved onto the bed, feeling the sickeningly plush blankets beneath my fingers. The soft touch of fabric was followed by cold skin, and sharp pain. "Hopefully by the time you wake, I'll have your twins in chains." Darkness engulfed me, but it only seemed to linger for a few moments. Long enough to dull the pain creeping across my body, making it a pulsing ache. I opened my eyes, which watered instantly against the artificial light and lack of windows. My vision doubled, and then tripled, showing multiples of Zayn as he stood at the foot of the bed. Once my head was finished swimming, I let out an incoherent groan. "Yeah, I get it. You feel like St." he said indignantly, coming around to the side of the bed. I let out a sound of protest as his hand wrapped around my wrist, more than uncomfortable from the feel of his icy skin. He scoffed under his breath and tugged, "Come on, Claire. Get the HL up." "What?" I snapped, turning my head enough to glare at him. Something soft and sweet was shoved in my face, making me recoil halfway across the bed. When I brought a hand to my mouth, I frowned at the sweet-tasting frosting that coated my fingers. "Your sugar is low, and you haven't eaten in 4 days." Zayn pointed out, his voice flat and impatient. "Marcus means to starve you until you comply, which would be any day now considering he's also not letting you feed from any souls." I had no time to contemplate the chances of being PD, because at the taste of the disgustingly sweet food, it snarled and howled for more. I finished off the contents of the cake, gulping down a glass of water to get the sweetness from my taste buds. "The cameras are on a loop. It was a one-time favor from a friend in security, so we're on borrowed time." He scowled. "What about the fight? Are Alec and Cade all right? Ariana isn't here, is she?" "The fight is still ongoing. Ariana joined in 23 minutes ago, and as far as I know, the twins are safe," he said in a rush, glancing towards the closed door. "Are you here to help me, Zayn?" I asked after a few seconds of silence, still too drained to even think about searching for his emotions. "I'm here to do what I can, like I promised." There was a hint of pain in his voice, just a sliver of vulnerability that made my heart drop. His voice was still smooth, though it was much darker now. "He found out about Tori through blood and magic, he found out. He's threatening to hurt her and her family, and it's my indifference to you that spares her. So, you can't get me out of here," I whispered, fearful but far from defeated. I felt the cool metal of the charm bracelet around my wrist, and knew I needed to take a leap. I held it up, letting Zayn get a good look at it. This was a gift from a friend. It sent out my location to the twins yesterday. They'll be here any day now, and when they get here, they're going to need a way in. It wasn't a position I wanted to put him in, but this was about finishing what I had started, tending the flame that had erupted into a full-scale bonfire. Smart? He snorted, smiling in a way that made my stomach feel sour. He left that on you because he assumed it was a gift from your mates. Figured it would motivate you to behave. Zayn was at a crossroads. He could remain inactive to protect Tori, but she would forever be hunted, because she would never leave my side. It was her loyalty I was sure of, and that was how I knew Zayn would help. Even without the use of my magic, I could feel that something had changed. At some point, whether he knew it or not, he had accepted the bond between them. Be prepared. I won't be able to give you a heads up, was all he said, eyes grim and jaw clenched. He was silent for so long that I thought he might just turn and leave. His eyes flickered towards the door as he asked, "Can you use your abilities subtly? Without the victim knowing of it?" I was long past flinching at the mention of my powers, and nodded in response. "Then it's a good thing there are 3 guards stationed outside of your cell," he replied with a twitch of his L.P.S., taking away some of that rigidity from his jaw. In 2 large strides, he stood at the metal door. "Be sure to look sickly once Ariana comes back, or she'll use her magic on you again, and it does look rather painful," I muttered, slumping back onto the bed as Zayn pounded on the door twice. It swung open with a thud, revealing one of the meatheads guarding my cell. When the door clattered shut, I slowly moved from the bed. Rather than leaning against the door, which clearly had some percentage of silver within the metal, I opted for the wall. I assumed Zayn wouldn't have mentioned feeding off of the guards if the walls had silver within them as well, so I decided to take my chances. If it didn't work well, I'd just have a migraine for a few hours. I slumped to the floor, my back against the wall as I closed my eyes and let the sounds trickle in from around me. I couldn't hear far, thanks to the reinforced walls and door, but I could hear the muffled chatting from the guards. It took some time and concentration to feel the flicker of light within their bodies, but slowly they raised to attention. All of my instincts said to take what I need, to tear it from them for the damage they had a hand in. I knew exactly what that would result in, a long trip from Ariana. Instead, I fought against my instincts. Instead of sinking my fingers in deep, I trailed along the surface. Even though the power I received was minimal, it was like a breath of fresh air that cooled my lungs and soothed my muscles. My shoulders slumped, and I let my head fall back against the wall as pain and agony seeped from my bones, replaced with just a small trickle of warmth. I stayed that way for what felt like nearly an hour, slowly sapping the strength from my guards. I stood from the floor, unable to risk taking anything more without them noticing. Eventually they'd grow tired, and if I took too much DH would certainly follow. My legs no longer felt like jelly, and the soreness had mostly faded. When I heard their voices sputter out, along with a creeping coldness, I knew I had stopped just in time. I began to hear the sound of the locks being unlatched, one at a time. The room was small enough that I made it to the bed before Ariana strolled in. There was no point in throwing back the blankets, I hadn't bothered when I passed out the first time. I laid on my stomach, my hair a knotted mess and my face buried in the pillows. Her footsteps were soft, calculated as she headed directly for where I laid. I heard her scoff of disgust, followed by the distinct feeling of a combat boot against the side of my head. She nudged me hard enough to make me wince, and I didn't hold back the half-conscious snarl that left my L.P.S. "I must have taken a lot out of you." She snickered softly, her voice just inches away from my head. I didn't stiffen, but I also made no move to indicate that I had heard her. Still, she felt the need to continue. "Or maybe you're just not as strong as everyone thinks you are. It's pathetic really. Lucky for me, I'm your kryptonite." Ariana didn't linger for long, giving me one last nudge with her boot before leaving the room, whistling a jolly tune that made me want to leap from the bed. I made it a point not to hate the emotion itself was similar to toxic waste. But Ariana, she was the closest I had come to feeling that emotion for myself. The beauty in her scowls, the cruelty that seemed so odd on such a young face. You would expect a monster to look the part, but no, they were often the most beautiful of creatures. I didn't move from my spot, feeling the camera's steel-cold eyes on my back as I moved with each deep, slumbering breath. I stayed there until sleep finally did claim me. I woke again to the feel of a boot on my face. This time when my eyes snapped open, I glared up at Ariana with bared teeth. Her thick, obsidian braid dangled in my face, the tips brushing against my nose. "Time to wake up," she snarled, realizing I was focusing solely on the large eye patch that took up nearly 1/4 of her face. I let out a raspy yelp when her fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me up and into a sitting position. Pain washed over my scalp and I could feel the individual hairs being torn from my head. I scrambled to follow where she led, and only when I was sitting on the floor, did she remove her claws from my head. I snarled up at her, whipping my head to glare at Marcus where he stood against the far wall. He had changed his suit, opting for one that was charcoal in color. His tie was a pale shade of blue, identical to his and Zayn's eyes. By all accounts, he was a handsome man, but once you saw the monster that hid within his gaze, it was something you wouldn't forget. "I haven't seen Ariana hate someone this much before," he stated, eyeing the two of us like experiments, rather than actual people. "You two will have to remain civil once we start working together." Through the sandstorm of fury, I had a thought. It was petty, rising from the depths of my mind, directed at the woman I had come to very nearly hate. If I were to join you, would I outrank Ariana? It was a stupid question, but it was one I knew would annoy Ariana off. Marcus would tell the truth, because why would he care what Ariana or I thought? If that's what you wanted, then yes. He lifted an eyebrow, but then shrugged indifferently. "I would name you my second in command. Under supervision, of course." The rage and flicker of fear on her face filled me with more warmth than any soul could. Any guilt I felt was squashed by the fact that she willingly chose to work for Marcus. That meant she could suffer the consequences when he treated her like his other minions expendable. Of course. I grinned sardonically, my eyes latched on Ariana's reddened face. "As you've stated many times though, you will not willingly join us." Really, I hoped your sense of self-preservation would lend some wisdom, but clearly I was mistaken. Marcus sighed, the disappointed parent. How I could have lived up to my potential, the ultimate weapon. I bristled as he continued, but kept unnaturally still in case Ariana wanted to make a grab for me. Marcus frowned down at me, but there was no sympathy or regret in his eyes. Only the unnerving determination to do whatever needed to be done. Whatever propelled him closer to his goal. "Your twins have retreated, revealing themselves for the cowards that they are. I now realize that in order to inspire your loyalty, I will have to break your spirit. You will come with us to your pack, and when your people are broken, your surrender will smother the last of their hope. Sleep while you can, Claire. I want you awake for the following events." Ariana tapped on her wrist, a clock ticking down its hands invisible to the eye, but still time continued. And soon it would run out. There was nothing for me to do once Marcus and Ariana left, taking the smoldering fumes of my hatred and fury along with them. I curled up on the bed, hating the way the blankets felt against my skin, how they smelled of laundry detergent and dryer sheets. They weren't the ones the twins used, the ones that smelled both masculine and earthy. My thoughts and worried meshed into one, coagulating into a nightmare that seemed to have no beginning or end. I was running through the blood-soaked streets conjured up by my subconsciousness, evading Marcus's claws as they came down from the sky, when a loud siren sounded. It blasted through my dream, one loud whoop after another. His hands gripped my shoulders, nails digging into flesh as he tore and tore. My eyes snapped open, the sound of Marcus's laugh ringing in my ears as the hazy images of my dream faded from behind my eyes. Those hands, they were still on my shoulders, but their fingers were no longer digging into me. There was no pain, just the soothing clash of sparks as they danced across my skin. Chapter 116. I stared at them for what felt like hours, even though all we had were seconds together. Onyx eyes filled with worry, voices thick and raspy with emotion. Neither looked sickly or sleep-deprived. If anything, they looked bigger. There wasn't the time to sit and analyze what had changed, but I swore their muscles seemed more defined, hardened like the bloodthirsty determination in their eyes. Once I was positive I wasn't hallucinating from the disgusting cake Zayn had given me, my eyes flitted across the small room. Tori and Zayn stood against the wall, a quiet and rushed conversation between the two. Zayn's eyebrows were gnashed together, and the sight of some kind of emotion on his face made my chest flutter. Those 3 seconds were all the twins could give me before I was pulled from the bed and into 2 sets of arms. Neither one squeezed too hard, but held me to their chests in an iron-clad grip that no white wolf could break. 3 heartbeats, all identical in sound as they overlapped one another. There were tears burning behind my eyes, but they wouldn't dare to fall. Even they knew that there was so much more to be done, that we weren't out of this yet. Doll Alex's voice was unusually raspy, eyes scanning my face as his forehead rested against my own. I watched his throat work to form the words that refused to pass his lips. Even Cade, who held back the turmoil of emotions in his eyes with everything he had, could do nothing more than hold me close and pray they'd forget the last few days. Their touch finally unraveled that knot of terror that had been festering in my stomach, reminding me that I might very well die here. Nearly an entire second had passed before I felt the absence of their touch. "Where is Marcus?" I asked Zayn, who had just finished his conversation with Tori. I locked eyes with her, feeling her relief and determination, though there was a certain smugness when her eyes flickered towards Zayn. Him and his inner circle retreat in times like this. His life is far too important to be wasted on a god-forsaken battlefield. Zayn said sardonically. I had the strong feeling his words were a direct quote, something he had heard Marcus say a time or two. Before I could reply, his eyes glazed over, a telltale sign that a mind link was currently taking place. 3 seconds was how long it took, and with each one, Zayn's eyebrows crept higher. When the film had lifted from his eyes, he blinked a few times in surprise. "Looks like an official order has been issued. I've been demoted from the Alpha's son, to KD on site. How lovely, this better have been worth it." He grunted, giving me a long look before stalking towards the badly bent, metal door. His sour words couldn't reach me, not when his eyes were bright and full of life, his cheeks tinged pink with blood. I didn't miss the 3 guards on the floor, or the blood that coated their clothes and sat in a crimson pool around their bodies. "We need to leave before more guards come." Cade's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp enough to gain my attention. I felt him thread his fingers through my own, and lead me towards the door. "The team we've put together took out the ones in the eastern wing of the mansion, but more are on their way." "Wait, the mansion? You didn't tell her?" Cade grunted, an eyebrow lifting at Zayn. We emerged from my padded cell, stepping over the broken and mangled bodies of the guards. The hallway we were in was small and narrow, but as we turned a corner, it opened up into a wide corridor. Fancy paintings were hung on the walls, their frames thick and weighing probably hundreds of pounds. The men in the paintings were all grey-haired, pale-eyed, and strong-jawed. Most of them happened to have that identical hint of cruelty in their eyes. Every 15 to 20 feet, a guard dressed in dark clothing lay on the floor. I didn't exactly have the time. I was too busy single-handedly ensuring the success of this uprising. He snapped, but the snarky tone fell flat when all of our attention was captured. Ariana stood at the end of the hall, her dark clothing and eye patch the first thing I noticed. Her thick braid hung down her shoulder, and the eye I could see, glittered murderously. Poor little traitorous Zayn! Ariana cooed, blood-red lips twitching as her eyes flitted to Tori. Anyone could read the tension between Tori and Zayn, along with the way they stood close yet apart. A grin cracked across her face. You brought your little mate to come play. When each one of you are locked up in chains, I'll give the redhead to the hound and take your twins for myself. Alec let out a deafening snarl that echoed down the corridor. He took a step in front of me, blocking me from Ariana. Cade stiffened instantly, his skin growing warm as he fought the urge to shift. His nails and teeth were elongating, growing as his rage increased. The fuses were lit, already shortened from nearly an entire week without one another. I knew that within seconds, everything would implode. I had a sneaking suspicion that if I were able to feel Ariana's emotions, it would be the exact opposite of Zayn's. I had a theory that she felt everything, but it was the wrong wolf she chose to feed, giving into cruelty and rage in order to progress in life. Cade halted in his tracks when I let out a loud laugh, a smirk on my face as I stared into the furious eyes of Ariana. I knew what she was up to, what she was doing here in this hallway. Even better, she knew that I knew. Oh, she hated me. More than she hated Zayn, which seemed immeasurable at the time. I could see it in the way she clasped her blade, eyes darting between Alec and Cade as she contemplated making her move. I could pinpoint the moment she realized attacking us would end in her DH. Sure, she might manage to wipe one of us out. Perhaps, even two. But there were more of us, and it was clear her backup wouldn't arrive on time. Her fingers flexed, and she let go of the knife that sat in the leather strap around her. Her eyes still glittered angrily, and even without my magic, her lust for blood was intoxicating. A pawn till the end. I scolded her, shaking my head in mock disappointment. Her own eyes narrowed as she read the promise in my own. Through high water, we would meet again, and I'd be the one to take her life. Until next time, Ariana. We darted down the hall, and I could feel both of the twins' reluctance as they followed. Their curious gazes were dark, feeling the hatred I held for Ariana. Both of them knew she had done something to evoke these dark emotions from me, promises of DTH and revenge. Zayn led us down another 2 halls, into a small room that led to a private staircase. It was one servants and maids used, to remain unseen as they traveled throughout the massive house. The staircase spiraled once as we went down. As we reached the bottom, the fresh smell of clean laundry hit my nose. I could hear the whir and hum of laundry machines going, and saw sheets and different articles of clothing hung up to dry. The room was entirely empty, free of any servants or lingering staff. There was a single door against the left-hand wall, and 2 on the right. Zayn led us to the left, wrenching open the door to reveal sunlight and warmth. I had been wondering why I hadn't seen any guards, hadn't heard any commotion until we emerged outside. The mansion looked more like an office building than someone's home, which is what I should have expected for a man like Marcus. The sight of it screamed government building, with its eggshell-colored pillars and arched doorways. The 600 cameras attached to every wall and corner were also further proof that Marcus's time needed to come to an end. We had exited through some kind of side door, which had a very clear employees only sign. What made me speechless were the buildings surrounding us. Banks and restaurants, shopping plazas, and hotels. Signs advertising the newest vehicle or designer purse were erected outside of shops. The entire site, including the widened sidewalks and iron fence surrounding the property, reminded me of Washington, D.C. However, the only thing different than the home of the human president, was that there was currently a full-scale war on the streets and sidewalks. Wolves of various colors fought to the D*H, their snarls ringing out as the scent of blood filled the air. Nearly a third were white wolves, but it was difficult to discern the abilities of each one. Some were in their human forms, using magic I had never seen before. The 5 of us had our eyes peeled, nearly barreled down by a white wolf as it leaped over our heads. We had been outside for almost 3 minutes, darting across the pristine lawn of Marcus's mansion to the street where carnage and D*H ran rampant. He kept me in his house. I scoffed, shouting over the noise. All this time I thought I was in some underground dungeon. He never thought his disappointment of a son would actually turn against him. Zayn snorted. He thought his secure mansion would be safe, and that Ariana would keep you at bay. Before we could do anything, go anywhere, there was a gentle vibration that rippled across the ground. It was quiet, a dull hum before raising in volume. Within seconds, my eyes widened and stole my breath. The sound was thunderous, thousands of feet trampling against the earth, snarls and howls rippling through the air as the surrounding forest and street erupted with wolves. There were so many they crowded the streets, leaped atop of cars and even some one-story buildings. Their howls coalesced into one loud call. A warning to stop the fight, to lay down our metaphorical weapons. The fight around us stopped, and I couldn't tell who belonged on which side. All I saw were werewolves, of all shades and colors. There were no discernible sides because we were all the same species. Fear swirled within all of our emotions, because Marcus's backup had finally arrived. With them, they brought a torrent of wolves, the colors a blur among the masses. Hundreds of eyes turned on us, on where we stood in the center of the street. We had been invisible to most when the battle had been raging, but now we were surrounded. I hadn't realized I'd been gripping onto Alex's t-shirt for dear life, while also digging my fingers into Kate's arm. I peered up at the 2 of them, who were looking down at me with reverence like they were committing the sight of me to memory. I looked towards Tori and Zayn, an apology burning in my eyes during these last moments of our lives, but neither were looking my way. Both held each other's eyes, and I couldn't mistake the fear that was written on Zayn's face. It was clear in his crystal eyes, in his downcast lips and clenched jaw. I wasn't sure, but I swore that when the 2 of them turned their eyes to the mass of werewolves, their fingers were woven together. We waited for the triumphant face of Marcus Novak to stroll out from the masses, from the werewolves that covered every inch of street, sidewalk, and parking lot. They even littered the grass of Marcus's mansion, passing the grounds in front of the iron fence. The crowd began to part, werewolves standing and moving out of the way, but it wasn't Marcus's smile that shined like a beacon, here to save us from our own destruction. It seems even D*H herself is against dear old Marcus. Jasper Fox's joyous voice rang throughout the crowd of werewolves, shattering the ice that had rooted me frozen in place. Chapter 117. It is within all of your best interests to stand down. Jasper Fox's voice rang throughout the crowd, strong and very much alive. The wolves he had brought with him twitched their tails in irritation. We were evenly matched now. I could see shimmering eyes deep within the forest, watching and waiting from the outside. Defy your alpha and take your own life into your hands, because soon Marcus Novak will be D*D. Jasper looked towards me and somehow, I was able to decipher the words within his pale-colored eyes. He was asking me a question, a simple yes or no. It took only a few seconds, reaching out with my magic before I had the answer. Disappointment and acceptance flashed in his eyes as I shook my head no. Many of the warriors here were loyal to Marcus, and radiated waves of hostility as they barely managed to keep themselves still. I could feel that so many of them were desperate for a way out, but the fear that stole their breath smothered any hope that might have flickered to life. My warning gave all of us a head start before a sand-colored wolf on Jasper's flank lunged for his throat. The sudden outpour of sound was violent symphony in the background. A second wolf, eyes the color of earth and fur the color of snow, moved with incredible speed, hurling itself at the enemy. They collided in a sea of gnashing teeth and snarls, but my attention was torn away before I could see who the victor had been. "Can you get her to Marcus?" Jasper questioned, gripping Zayn by the bicep in what I assumed was a greeting. "He has bunkers all over the country, but he'd want to stay close," Zayn said, piercing eyes narrowing as he paused for a moment. His eyes flickered up to mine, surprisingly calm considering he was sentencing his father to D*H. "I know where he is. Lead the way." I swallowed, nerves settling in my stomach. I noticed his eyes weren't on me but focused somewhere behind my head. Whirling around, I expected to see the towering form of a snarling wolf. What I noticed were the twins, thick onyx fur and blood-stained teeth as they fought to protect the three of us. A flash of red sat just a few feet away from the twins, right where Zayn happened to be standing. Tori's crimson wolf leaped through the air, muzzle coated in blood as she sunk her teeth into the throat of an enemy. Despite her lean form, she thrashed back and forth, tearing the flesh of the wolf before letting its body fall to the ground. My own eyebrows crept higher at the look on Zayn's face, an expression I wasn't sure he had ever made before. He watched Tori with surprise brimming in his eyes, the realization that he had underestimated her, that he didn't truly know her. Part of me wanted to think that even if he didn't accept the bond, he was beginning to realize that Tori was his Luna. "Where can I find him, Zayn?" I asked, pulling him back into the present as I read the clear reluctance in his eyes. "Tell me, and I'll take the twins." I kept my eyes trained on his face, knowing he'd surely shut down if I even mentioned Tori's presence. "From behind the mansion, it's a 3-mile run to my mother's old estate. You'll lose their scent at the river, but you must keep going. Marcus and his inner circle are in an underground bunker, in the basement. You won't pick up his scent again until you're inside." His eyes met mine, emotionless and unwavering. Poise and perfection amidst brutal backdrop. "They're going to know you're coming, and they won't be alone. Ariana, the Hound, and Chaos will be there. Ariana is the only one who poses a threat to me. Once she is out of the picture, the rest of them will fall." I said a bit darker than I intended, rage clouding my vision for those fleeting seconds. "Do the world a favor, don't lose yourself trying to kill Marcus." Zayn grunted, unreadable eyes of crystal blue flickering down to my own. "There's no one alive to stop you if you go dark." With that heartfelt farewell, Zayn flexed his fingers and squared his shoulders, taking long strides forwards before shifting into a slate-grey wolf. His form was as large as the twins, nearing the size of a bear. There was an elegance to the way he walked, holding his head high. As I watched him bound into the thickest part of the fight, where Tori's fiery wolf currently resided, I wondered what type of alpha Zayn might turn out to be. I muttered. "Consider it a compliment. That's more concern than he's shown in years." Jasper smirked, his eyes holding the answers to the dozens of questions swimming in my head. I'll be sending a few warriors to keep Marcus's guys off your tail. Keep your guys from them for me. I let my thoughts mesh with Alec and Cade's, both of which were charging through battle as though they had been born to it. Neither were white wolves, but their aura of dominance and ferocity made me want to run in the opposite direction. They seemed larger than most of the wolves, their teeth longer and sharper. That alone made them frightening. I gave both a hasty recap of what Zayn had said, and the plan that was now set in place. Both took a few seconds to finish off their prey, tossing limp, fur-covered bodies to the side. "You two in?" I asked, breathless even though I had yet to join the fight. "Of course, doll." Alec's voice was rough, raspy from battle and the thrum of adrenaline. "You're not leaving our side for the foreseeable future." Alec and Cade paved the way, demolishing any wolf who stood against us. I sprinted alongside of them, my lungs burning as cool air whipped across my cheeks. Even though my limbs burned from the lack of exercise, my thundering heart was soaring. I slid off the t-shirt I wore and tied it around my ankle, knowing sooner or later I would have to shift back. I took deep breaths, savoring the moisture and scent of nature in the air. There were no more cement walls and artificial light, the floral scent of laundry detergent and the grating voice of Marcus Novak. I could feel the twins' emotions as if they were my own and reveled in the feeling of freedom that sent me propelling forwards. At some point Cade had warned me that going too long without shifting would hurt. As my bones cracked and pulled apart, I realized how right he had been. Pain was short-lived in comparison to what was to come, the knowledge that I was on my way to end a life. What shocked me even further was the lack of regret, and the pure determination that this was what needed to be done. I wasn't sure where the confidence had come from, but I knew that when the time came, I wouldn't hesitate. "Don't kill the wolves following us. Not unless they ATK. I warned the twins, wedged between the two of them as we sprinted through the forest, and around the side of the mansion. Jaspa sent us some help. On the left side of the building was a large parking lot, likely for employees and servants. We had chosen the right side, which was dense forest that wrapped around the back and stretched farther than I could see. "Ariana has to go first," I told the two of them. "She can keep me from using my magic, but if she gets her hands on me," I repressed a shudder, that ice-cold sensation dripping down the back of my spine. Both of my mates could see and feel the memory of her touch, seared into my skin. Their determination turned just a tad more bloodthirsty. "Chaos won't be a problem." Alex snickered, his voice still held that playful edge. "He's already DD." I almost stopped in my tracks and huffed when Alec nipped at my heels to steady me. Surprise pulsed through me, and just a hint of perverse joy as I remembered how he had turned my mates against one another. "How did it happen?" I asked, hearing Cade snicker as he felt my smugness. "Did you K***l him?" "Unfortunately, no. Cade held that honor." Alec grunted, truly disappointed. "As for how it happened, chaos gets distracted easily." Cade finished Alec's sentence, his voice darkness wrapped in silk, the anger in his words barely contained. It was why he hadn't spoke yet, why he hadn't expressed the turmoil that was surely going on inside of him. Cade handled his emotions through brute strength, physical exertion, and good old-fashioned revenge. The wolves Jaspa had sent to protect us did their jobs, taking down any that noticed our presence. We followed the fading trail of Marcus's scent as we approached the river, unable to detect it any further. The three of us skidded to a stop as we came upon the pitiful remains of what was once a beautiful estate. A wrought iron fence spanned the property, its gate was covered in stray vines, with little red flowers growing in small clusters. Its slow and steady creak sounded unbearably loud as I wrenched it open wide enough for us to slip through. I kept a hand on Alec and Cade, letting my fingers sink into their thick fur. The t-shirt I wore wasn't the most comfortable thing to wear into battle, but it covered everything important as it reached nearly to my knees. A cracked and faded sign read Novak Estate, welded onto the iron gate. Crumbling pillars sat on either side of what must have once been a paved driveway. There wasn't much asphalt left, mostly weeds and clumps of dry dirt. The entire place held an underlying tone of sadness, a loneliness that stained the earth and the air. Enough remained of the estate's structure that I could tell it was beautiful in its prime. Large windows that were shattered and had crumbled, were placed to let in copious amounts of sunlight. Twin balconies with ornate railings sat on the left and right side, somehow still standing despite all the other structural issues. We entered through where the front door must have been. That part of the house had eroded, taking behind a good portion of the ceiling. The basement doors, which were wide enough to fit both twins, were through the kitchen and into a small servant's quarters. From the looks of it, this place was meant to be an intimate and private home. Much warmer than Marcus's office-like mansion. As we left the sunlight behind for more confined spaces and artificial light, I could see why no one would dare search this far. The air felt heavier, as if I could still taste whatever tragedy had occurred here. The walls were of smooth cement, and every 10 feet hung a small dome light from the ceiling. It left just a few inches of darkness between each light. Within that darkness, I watched a familiar eye open. Hazel with hues of moss and gold, ruined by the cruelty that shined within them. "You talked a big game earlier, Claire." Ariana cooed sweetly, grinning at the twins and I. "But you're going to die here, like a pathetic nobody, in some woman's house. While the meat is rotting off your bones, I'll be up there, ruling the world." "You won't be ruling anything, Marcus will." I answered reflexively, a flicker of rage igniting in my gut when her smile widened. "You'll never make it to him, you know." She snickered, turning on her heel as she sprinted off into the shadows. It was clear she was leading us into a trap, but there was no other choice. The hallway twisted and turned, but never once branched off. It was a one-way shot to the bunker, and there was no avoiding the fight that was brewing. I sprinted around the corner after the twins when I heard Ariana shout, "I had to convince him you weren't worth keeping. Too rabid and uncontrollable, there's no other choice but to put you down." I didn't even have to convince him to K***l Zayn. No, he set those plans in motion himself. My breath halted for a moment, thoughts flitting back to Zayn and Tori, both of which were neck-deep in the fight. A wave of panic threatened to overtake me at the thought of Tori losing her mate, but I swallowed the emotion for the time being. There was nothing I could do from here, but I could focus on K**G Marcus. That might save us all. The hallway opened into a large, circular room. At the very end was a metal door, much like what I would expect a safe room to have. A guard stood on either side, and next to Ariana stood the Hound. The scent of wet earth and mildew mixed with his body odor, filling the room with the scent of rot and sweat. "That's right, breathe it in. This is where you're going to die. In this filthy hovel, like a mutt." Ariana chuckled sharply, noticing the way my nose wrinkled at the smell. With each insult she hurled my way, Cade's rage ratcheted higher. His vision quickly became tinged in shades of red before a deafening snarl left his mouth, and his muscular form lunged for her throat. Chapter 118. Cade's rage became him, heating his blood until it boiled as it pumped throughout his form. The violent emotion overtook him completely, giving his increased strength a savage edge. Alex's Head was a different story, the same book but in another format. He could see and breathe through his rage, using it to propel not himself, but his thoughts forward. Strategies and plans flitted through his head, disorienting and at rapid fire. Many of them looked like football plays, marking where Ariana, the hound, and the two guards stood. I tried not to give in to the sinking feeling that overtook me, when even Alec couldn't produce a plan of action. We were outnumbered, exceptionally considering I couldn't use my magic while Ariana was in the room, and my combat training was strictly lodged in the beginner stage. Still, I hadn't come this far by giving up. Through pain and blood, I'd give everything I had. With my mates at my side, both identical and different in every way, the very idea of failure became an impossibility. Ariana hadn't been appointed Marcus Novak's personal assassin for her doll-like smile and charming personality. Like a poisonous flower with curling petals, her beauty was just another distraction before the K*L. She stepped to the side just as Cade's teeth glided past her neck, snapping down on where she had previously stood. His claws scraped across the rough cement floor as he slid to a stop. Her eyes hadn't even left my face, her smile never once wavered. A reckless, poorly thought-out plan of my own flitted through my head. I closed my thoughts off from the twins, knowing both would do whatever possible to keep me from acting it out. Take out the guards and the hound. I told them both through mind link, ignoring the incredulous look Alec was giving me. I'll take down Ariana. Cade heeded my command as though it were law, letting out an ear-piercing snarl as he dove into one of the guards. The hound was next to shift, smelling even stronger in wolf form. The scent of his body odor mixed with that blood-covered animal. I sprinted towards Ariana, giving Alec no time to stop me. The second guard was charging my way, hair sprouting from his face and neck as he shifted. With a snarl aimed in my direction, Alec barreled into the guard before he had the chance to reach me. I had to play this perfectly. It wasn't hard to feign hesitation, to let it halt my movements ever so slightly. I made a point to glance down at the knives strapped to her waist and thighs, then took a step backwards. Power is wasted on the weak. How you were given so much of it is beyond my understanding. She said softly, with so much disappointment that I snarled. A sensual smile twitched onto her, a glittering serpent leading its prey into murky waters. She unlatched the knives from her waist and thighs, letting them clatter to the ground. With her arms spread out on either side, she took a step towards me. I don't even need a weapon to K*Lu, Claire. You can run like a coward or face me. Either way, it will be your blood that stains the ground for the next 100 years. Amid the snarling, my footsteps echoed loudly across the floor as I sprinted towards Ariana, and what could easily be my doom. The few lessons I had still ringing in my head. I made a wild grab for one of the knives she dropped, unfortunately choosing one that would give me little distance. One touch from her and my blood would turn cold, my strength sapped like a magical juice box. Her lips twitched and eyes shone with satisfaction, which I hope stemmed from how predictable my actions were. Gripping the padded hilt of the knife until my knuckles turned white, I shifted into my best fighting stance. She shook her head once more before lunging with elongated claws. In the back of my mind, Tori's lengthy proclamation about combat being a dance of blood of D*H played on repeat. I had taken her seriously at the time, but it's different when one wrong move, one mistake can send you into an early grave. Though sparring with Tori was exhausting at best, it lacked the same terror that an actual fight to the DH had. It was my own reserve of strength and Thalia's hatred for Ariana that kept me from D*H within the first 5 minutes. She wasn't aiming for my throat, but for the soft flesh of my stomach. The wound would have hurt, and surely slowed me down as I bled to D*H. I managed to sidestep in time, though not fast enough to remain untouched. Cold, tearing pain ripped through my arm, right where her nails had broken the skin. The pain was heightened from her brief touch, turning a weeping scratch into what felt like a gaping wound. I swung the knife as she inched forwards, hearing the metal slice through the air. The move was on the reckless side, further pushing the idea that I wasn't a trained fighter, and that my luck with stabbing her eye out had been a one-off. I let fear blossom in my eyes and then stomped on it, poorly smothering it as I feigned courage. Ariana danced backwards, eyes bright and eager. I saw her next move coming. Even if I had the knowledge to avoid it, I wouldn't have. The plan I had, which had a high percentage of failure, wouldn't work unless we were close, as in, she had to touch me. Her fist slammed into my stomach, tearing the breath from my lungs as her sheer strength sent me toppling backwards. The grunt that left my lips wasn't forced but helped reassure her that I was an easy K*L. As I had hoped, she surged forward and used her weight to send me falling to the ground. She straddled me, her nails digging into my shoulders. I could feel warmth flooding my skin, soaking into the fabric of the shirt I wore. She grinned down at me, a cat growing tired of toying with its prey. Ariana's magic wasn't subtle or gentle, there was no build-up before the inevitable pain. One moment I felt the tear of my flesh from her nails and the next, bitter cold seeped into my bones and made my limbs grow numb. Every instinct in my body told me to revolt, to fight, and thrash with every ounce of energy I had left. I resisted those urges, screaming and shouting within the confines of my own head. Like metal frozen from ice and cold, my limbs all but refused to work. Instead of fighting the connection between the two of us, I used my magic and pulled. Using my magic while she was feeding from me accelerated. A room of 6 shimmering lights, like candle flame. One of the 6 was flickering, growing weaker and weaker until only the wick smoldered. There was a 7th light in the room. Only it was cold, dark, and without heat. It was desperate, grasping for the light with everything it had, but it was destined to remain frozen. I pulled from those 5 shimmering lights, trying desperately to grasp some of that strength for my own before Ariana devoured it. I knew that Alec and Cade were among the 5, but I was smothered in layers of agony that were too thick to peel back. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice strained and hazel eyes wide, so wide that I could see the different shades of brown within their surfaces. All that energy, it was having an impact on her. Not only did I pull from the twins and the warriors in the room, but I shoved it all down her throat. Instead of resisting, I gave it eagerly. My fingers twitched, and just a speck of warmth flooded my skin. It wasn't a coat or a hat, meant to withstand the bitter frost. Instead, it was a cup of hot chocolate, fighting away the cold for just those few precious seconds. When my fingers wrapped around the slim hilt of the blade I had picked up, I managed a warped grin of my own. "I'm distracting you." The same moment, I plunged the blade up and under her ribcage. Cade's blood-coated muzzle snapped down on her neck and shoulder. For just a split second, time seemed to freeze. True surprise blossomed across her pale face, eyes blown wide with the prospect of her own D*H. The blush on her cheeks was the same shade as the blood that poured down the jagged, open wound. Time sped up and Cade tore her from my body, flinging her against the wall with a sickening thud. That splash of crimson seared itself into my memory, along with glossy auburn hair and blank eyes. Cade's muzzle tore me from my endless stare at Ariana's corpse, her head angled so that her eyes landed on my face. "Sweetheart, pay attention." Cade's voice, though rough and hoarse, helped steady my nerves. He was trying to rein in that rage, the one that told him to K*L and ravage, to destroy until nothing was left. It was his concern for me that kept his mind at bay. We don't know how many are in his inner circle. There's no telling how many wolves are going to come out. We need a plan. I cleared my throat, thankful my voice didn't break, though it was still full of disbelief. "We already have one." Alex's voice was soft, but also clear and determined. "It's you, doll. You can feed from them and strengthen yourself. Focus on Marcus, and we'll handle the rest." Cade shifted into his human form, doing what I couldn't as he pulled Ariana's body over to the thick, steel door. He placed the palm of her hand against a flat sensor. A near-silent click sounded, followed by the whir of gears turning. The interior was almost predictable. A room for rich cowards who loved nothing more than watching the masses fight and die in their battles. Leather couches and Persian rugs, mahogany coffee tables and even a bar area. What made it unique were the copious television screens mounted on the walls, capturing footage of the fight in town. I took a few tentative steps forward, stopped by Alex's low growl. From where I stood just 10 feet away, the room looked empty. 1 second passed, and then 2. A flash of silver eyes was all I saw before everything descended into chaos. Rather than slow, the adrenaline coursing through me sped things up. A silver wolf leaped over my head, its claws just 2 feet above me. I turned on my heel, my magic lashing out with desperate ferocity. It sunk into the thick hide of Marcus's wolf, another cold flame. This time I was the one distracted and had no time to react when a gunshot rang out. The sound echoed, bouncing off the walls as it tore through my eardrums. It was foreign to my ears, considering I now lived in a world of claws and teeth. It had come from the bunker. An errant thought flitted through my mind, something about Marcus and his inner circle. He fell to the ground, ripped backwards by an invisible tether. He twisted and writhed but was forced to stop thrashing. Eyes of blue and silver flitted up to meet my own, radiating hostility along with that infuriating confidence. Something dark flashed behind my shoulder, falling to the ground in a mess of fading fur and pale skin. Dark glee filled Marcus's pale eyes, making my once heated blood run cold. "Focus." Alex's voice was a warning not to turn around, not to break my concentration from the silver wolf in front of me. I could hear his snaps and snarls as he charged into the bunker, along with an additional 3 gunshots. The echo of Alex's voice followed each one, reminding me what was truly at stake. "Shift!" I snarled, my ears popping from the pressure as I pulled with my magic. Where Ariana's magic was forged from the harsh Arctic, mine held the heat and radiance of a soul. What I felt as I fed from Marcus's soul made me stop instantly, both revolted and horrified at the stain I now felt was beneath my skin. It was utter darkness, a gaping pit that hungered for more and more, never satiated. Even if he had beaten us and claimed me as his own, it would have never been enough. "Shift!" I snarled, giving another harsh tug that made his hackles raise. Silver fur retreated, limbs shifting until Marcus Novak sat on the cement floor. The sight was jarring to see a man decorated in designer suits, lifted above the masses, sprawled out in the dirt. If this had been the first time I ever laid eyes on Marcus Novak, I wouldn't have looked twice. A man so cold and empty inside that he was forced to chase the light that others exuded. What some had in abundance, he had none. "She's never lost, you know." His voice was strained, emotionless even in the face of the inevitable. The physical pain in his words reminded me that he wasn't this great villain, but a werewolf like the rest of us. The sheer indifference in his eyes threatened to send me into my own bloodthirsty rage, but I suppressed those emotions. He didn't bother glancing towards Ariana or feigning any grief when it came to her D*H. Even as I crouched down, wrapping my hand around the hilt of one of Ariana's blades, he was free from the burden of human emotions. Neither have I. I hovered over him, my hand steady as the silver coating on the blade glittered like an old friend. My heartbeat roared in my ears as eyes of cold steel met my own. Sooner or later, everyone loses. You would think that it was cathartic, ending the life of someone who had caused so much HR. That there would be some grand finale, the stars trickling down from the heavens as D*H swung her scythe and claimed yet another soul. There was no physical change that rippled across the earth as Marcus Novak left this world. You couldn't feel the absence, the lack of evil that had once existed within this one person. The stubborn fury to his eyes that refused to fade, even when all awareness had vanished, and breath no longer fell from his lips. Men like Marcus Novak, they never submit, even in D*H. What I could feel were the shackles falling from thousands of wolves' wrists, clattering against the blood-soaked earth as Marcus's iron grip was finally removed. I had no time to process the change that practically rippled across the earth. Any joy I would have felt was smothered, held tightly in the grip of panic. An echo of searing pain rushed through me, hard enough to make my teeth snap together. It throbbed and burned just below my left collarbone, matching the gunshot wound in Cade's chest.